All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dig into a battle from over 1,400 years ago. But trust me, this is way more than just a history lesson. The Battle of Nahrawan is this incredible and honestly tragic look at how really strong beliefs can spiral out of control, turning people who were once brothers in arms into the most bitter of enemies.
And it all kicked off with this one simple phrase: no rule but the rule of God. It's powerful, it's pious, and it is the rallying cry for a group that would become known as the Kharijites. On the surface, it's a statement of pure faith, right? But it's a phrase that would eventually be twisted to justify a really brutal war.
So the big question is, how does that happen? How does a deeply religious idea go so wrong? Well, to figure that out, we have to look at the Battle of Nahrawan. It all went down in July of 658 CE, not far from modern-day Baghdad, and it left these deep, deep scars on the community that would honestly last for centuries.
You see, the thing that makes this battle so heartbreaking is that this wasn't a fight against some foreign enemy. This was a civil war in the truest sense. It was the army of the fourth caliph, Ali ibn Abi Talib, fighting a rebel group that not too long before had been fighting right alongside him. They were his own men.
So how on earth do you get from allies to mortal enemies? To get that, we've got to rewind the clock about a year before Nahrawan to a single decision that basically broke an army in two. Okay, so check this out, because things went south fast. During this huge battle, the Battle of Siffin, Ali's army was pretty much on the brink of winning. But then the other side calls for arbitration, a peaceful negotiation. And to stop more Muslims from being killed, Ali agrees. But for a certain group in his army, this was a deal breaker.
And that group? Well, they got a name, the Kharijites. It literally means the seceders, or the ones who went out. And their whole argument was built on that one core belief: only God has the right to judge. By agreeing to let humans negotiate, they said Ali had committed a terrible sin, and because of that, they just couldn't follow him anymore.
And this is the moment where that piety really turns into a weapon. Their interpretation of faith was so rigid, it led them to this really dangerous practice called takfir, which is basically declaring any other Muslim who doesn't agree with you an unbeliever. And once you do that, well, suddenly your former brothers in arms, even Ali himself, become legitimate targets. They started raiding villages, killing civilians. It was chaos.
So now you've got the Kharijites causing terror, and Caliph Ali knows he has to step in. But his first instinct wasn't to just crush them with his army. He actually hoped he could talk some sense into them. These were men who had once fought right beside him, after all.
So his very first move? Diplomacy. He sent respected scholars out there to actually debate with the rebels. The hope was that through logic and theology, he could pull them back from the edge, avoid any more bloodshed. And for some of them, it actually worked. But the hardliners, they weren't budging.
And this right here, this shows you everything you need to know about the two mindsets. Even with his army ready, Ali makes one last, incredibly generous offer. He promised total amnesty and safety to anyone who would just leave. He even said they could rejoin his army, no questions asked. But the Kharijite leaders, they saw only one way out: a glorious death in battle.
And you know what? That offer to de-escalate had a real impact. About 1,200 of the rebels actually took him up on it. They put down their weapons and just walked away from the battlefield. No fight. But yeah, the rest of them, the 2,800 hardliners, for them, compromise was just not an option. They were completely convinced they were fighting for God, that dying on that battlefield meant an instant ticket to paradise. And so, they launched this ferocious, all-out attack.
The battle itself was incredibly intense, but it was over fast. The Kharijites fought like lions, but they were just completely outmatched. Militarily, it was a huge victory for Ali, but just look at these numbers. This tells the real story. It's a tragedy. Nearly 2,400 of his former soldiers dead on the field.
So Ali won, right? End of story? Not even close. Let's talk about the aftermath, because this so-called decisive victory, it ended up being a strategic disaster that created way bigger problems down the line.
Right after the battle, you can understand why Ali felt like he'd solved the problem. He famously declared that he had uprooted the fitna, the source of all this civil strife. He thought he'd cut out the cancer and stabilized everything.
But here's the thing. You can destroy an army, but it's a lot harder to destroy an idea. The few Kharijites who survived the battle scattered, and they took with them this burning need for revenge.
And just 2 years later, one of those survivors assassinated Caliph Ali while he was praying, a direct, tragic consequence of this very battle.
So, why are we talking about a 1,400-year-old battle today? Because the patterns we see here of sincere faith turning to violent extremism, of divisions inside a community being more dangerous than any threat from the outside, these patterns are absolutely timeless. They keep showing up.
Just look at this table. It lays out the two different leadership styles, and the contrast is just night and day, isn't it? You've got Ali's approach, which was all about preserving the community, using dialogue, justice, and mercy. And then you have the Khawarijite approach, which was so focused on ideological purity that it was willing to tear that same community apart.
And this four-step process is a chillingly familiar pattern we've seen again and again throughout history. It starts with something good, right? Sincere belief. But when you mix that with a rigid, black-and-white interpretation, it can lead to demonizing anyone who disagrees. And from there, it's a short step to justifying violence.
You know, behind all the big political moves and ideologies, it always comes down to individual people. There's this one story from after the battle that it sticks with you. A Khawarijite prisoner named Shimmer was complaining that his ropes were too tight. And Ali's own son, Hussein, showed him a moment of mercy and asked for them to be loosened. Years later, that very same man would play a central, brutal role in the tragic death of Hussein himself. It's just a haunting reminder of how acts of mercy and cruelty can echo through time.
So when you boil it all down, the lessons from this ancient battle are incredibly modern. It shows us that our internal fights can be way more dangerous than any outside enemy. It screams at us about how important it is to try every possible path of dialogue before resorting to conflict. And it's this powerful warning that sincere belief, when it's not guided by wisdom and compassion, can become one of the most destructive forces on the planet. And that leaves us with a really tough question, doesn't it? The story of Neharwan doesn't give us any easy answers. What it does is force us to ask ourselves, where is that line? How do we hold on to our principles without letting them become weapons? That question was urgent 1,400 years ago, and it is just as vital for every single one of us to wrestle with today.